Welcome to the Jerusalem Lights Podcast with Rabbi Chaim Richman, whose goal is Torah for everyone. I'm your co-host, Jim Long, and now Rabbi Chaim Richman.
Shalom Aleichem. Jim, how are you?
I'm very fine, Rabbi. Shalom, and is it too early to say Happy Rosh Chodesh to you?
It's never too early. Well, actually, no, it isn't too early. This is the last week. These are the last days of our month of Mar Cheshvan, and this Thursday evening and Friday we will be welcoming the new month of Kislev. And actually, of course, everybody knows Kislev is the month of Chanukah, the beginning of Chanukah, and it's the month of miracles. So get your seatbelt fastened, because anything can happen if we're expecting, anticipating, and precipitating miracles. And I think that whereas this past month, this outgoing month of Mar Cheshvan, we talked about how it was about actualizing, what we were praying for so fervently during the month of Tishrei. But yet the fact that it featured no holidays and no major observances, it was about purification and kind of like letting go. This month of Kislev is about miracles, and it's also about actualizing dreams. And in fact, according to the secrets of our sages, who basically ascribe different kind of like spiritual fixings and attributes that correspond to the nefesh and that correspond to different ideas to each month. Each month has its own energy. So there's a concept. This coming month of Kislev is the time for the fixing of sleep. Now, on the simple level, this is now the beginning of winter. So the nights are longer. We're all changing the clock. The days are getting shorter. The nights are getting longer. It's colder outside, and so it seems to be conducive, to allowing oneself to sleep longer and that type of thing. But it's much more than that. It's the idea of our sages teaching us that it's the month for fixing the attribute of sleep, is that sleep is an important time of our life now, because when we sleep, we heal and our souls soar and they have visions. Our souls ascend to an upper world. And so that needs to be wholesome and whole and pure. Now, of course, everybody knows that this corresponds to the fact that during this month of Kislev, we basically read all of the Torah's portions that have to do with dreaming. We have Yaakov sees the ladder. We have Yosef's dreams and Pharaoh's dreams.
Jacob being told to go down to Egypt.
Right. So it's basically, that shows us that it is a time for. Now, what happens when you dream? When you dream, you can see things. Now, some of it is, of course, nonsense, and our sages speak a great deal about the fact that, dreams are not necessarily prophetic at all. It might be what you ate. It might be your heartburn. It might be what you saw during the day. But it's also an opportunity to, yes, have an experience that you would not normally be able to have, because you are now in that state able to transcend logic. Mm-hmm. You're able to transcend what you think is logic, and you're able to go to a different place. So that's the thing about Kislev in a way, is that it's kind of like an opportunity to deepen faith in Hashem and not to be shackled or held back by the limitations that we've set on our own minds. Because if there's one thing that Kislev teaches us, of which is, of course, the embodiment of Kislev is Chanukah. It was the victory of a small band of Jews against a mighty army, and they were hopelessly outnumbered, and they were completely politically and militarily incorrect and inferior, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is that it was a battle of faith. It was a battle against the God of Israel and faith in him. And that is not about the mind. That is about the strength of the heart and the soul. And that's what opens up new possibilities, new dimensions, and enables us to do things in ways that we couldn't do previously. And all that is a secret, in a way, of dreaming. So when you allow yourself to dream and go forward on your faith, you're basically trusting Hashem.
Yeah, I wanted to mention two things in reference to that. And one is a saying from the Chazal, from sages, about dreaming that has always fascinated me, and that is that they say that a dream is a 60th of prophecy. What does that mean, a 60th
There's
of
actually
prophecy?
a group of teachings in the Talmudic sages speak about various things being 1/60th. For example, Shabbat is like 1/60th of the world to come. Now, a 60th is pretty small measurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think that maybe the sister thought of the one that you've quoted is that sleep itself is 1/60th of death. Okay, so how do I understand that sleep is 1/60th of death, and that why the sages, who were so tremendously wise and who were masters of calculation and of understanding, nuances and fractions as well. So why it's 1/60th exactly, I won't venture a thought on that at this juncture. But the idea of death being 1/60th of sleep, or some reflection, sleep being 1/60th of death. Obviously, the idea is, and we can understand, on a simple level, that the body is on a reduced footing, in terms of our functions, in terms of our systems. All of our systems are in, basically, we can understand it from the computer, in sleep mode, right? There's something called sleep mode. And now you know why. What's sleep mode? When you press that button, is that you're conserving energy, and it goes into a state which is not off yet, but that's what the Windows description says on it, right? When you hover over the sleep mode, it's not off, but you can immediately come back to your work when you wake it up. So when we're sleeping, you know very well that our brain is in a different state, and REM and all that kind of business, depending on the depth of the sleep, and how the body is affected, how the mind is affected. So too, like I said, when a person is sleeping and has dreams, much of it can come from the thoughts that we had during the day. Much of it can come from physiological reasons, like what we ate and that sort of thing, and bodily issues. But it's also a time we know that the soul is liberated, that a portion of the soul, because it's complex, what the human soul is all about. There are different parts of it, right? So, but there is one part that is definitely basically returning to its source. In other words, when our souls down here, we are, there's only a fraction of ourselves in the body. I always say, in fact, we say this all the time. We have occasion to bring this up so many times in our Zoom classes, to remind ourselves that we are spiritual beings. We are beings of light, but we are wrapped in an envelope, in a material envelope. And the fact that is the case, that we are spiritual beings of light in a physical envelope, is the cause of so much confusion, consternation, crisis in our lives, because we're constantly being pulled, between these forces, thinking that this is me, that I'm the steak sandwich, I'm the material, I'm the physical, and it's just so not true. It's just so not true. So when the person is sleeping and the soul is liberated to return to its majority shareholding, because it's only a piece of us that's here, and it sees what it sees and is reunited with the source, then things are presented to it that it can gain from. And this is a whole science in Torah as well, to how a person can remember dreams, and how a person can learn from the experience. And then of course there's even an idea in Jewish law that a person can, again, even though we're not calling it prophecy per se, although for example the sages say that, well, there are certain times when a person has a dream right before morning, right before waking up, that is the closest experience to prophecy, the early morning kind. And many times you wake up suddenly with a rush, and you feel that it wasn't just a dream; it was like an invitation, or like a visitation, or something. Or if a dream is repeated, especially at that time. But the idea is that, it is not necessarily a prophetic experience, but yet there's an idea that when a person has a bad dream that disturbs them very, very much, and makes them unnerved, and makes them filled with anxiety and angst, there's a whole process where they actually, sometimes if it's that disturbing, a person even fasts.
Yeah.
And even if it's not that disturbing, a person can kind of make a certain kind of declaration, kind of like an annulment of the dream before a Beit Din, to try and mitigate the spiritual heaviness that it caused. So this is a real thing.
I wondered if it also doesn't mean two things. One is that, real prophecy from God, real prophecy, which is from Hashem, that means that it represents the world of truth. And that is that maybe it means that embedded in your dream is a component of truth that comes right from the throne. And the other is, I wonder if there isn't a kind of space-time sort of reference in that when 1 second goes by in the real time in your dream, a whole panorama of experiences can unfold in that 1 second while you're dreaming. That is outside
it's
of.
Like there's some sort of compression.
Yeah.
It's like you wake up sometimes and you think you had a dream that took 8 hours because there's so many different scenes and epic. And sometimes people have these dreams where they remember that they were doing so many different things, and then they realize that it took place over an infinitesimal amount of time, because it's kind of like there's no limitation. So I started responding. I don't know if I even answered your question, but I started talking about the companion thought that sleep is 1/60 of death. So too, and what does that mean again? That there is a kind of like a sleep mode, right?
Yeah.
That the body is in. So too, it's a very, very small taste of death. It's not death at all, but it is on one level a decrease and a minimalization of functionality that reflects a very small shadow of that state. So too, a dream can be that same tip of an iceberg, little tiny taste of true prophecy. If it is, again, it can, or it could just be one aspect, one symbol, one message, one image that is retained, can indeed have some tremendous implication. Good time to talk about this also in terms of a synthesis of ideas. I began talking about this concept because of the upcoming month of Kislev, which gives us the opportunity to work on this concept of the rectification of sleep. And I'm sure we'll have many opportunities coming up in the coming month to talk about this. But also in our portion this week of Toldot, which is epic, absolutely epic and life-changing and tremendous, just staggering implications. The birth of Yaakov and Esav and their struggle as twins in the womb of Rivka. So Rivka has a prophecy.
Yeah.
Rivka has a prophecy, and in her prophecy, she's told that what's going on inside her is something else altogether. And I want to speak much more about this in our upcoming video this week. The story in our Torah portion of Toldot, which begins in Genesis chapter 26, it works on many, many levels. Of course, the simplest level that we're reading about is these two diametrically opposed brothers that were so different and that were so kind of locked in a life and death struggle from the very beginning. But there's so much more to it. Oh, and this is, of course, what I want to explore this week in our video, what they really represent. And this story is, and again, I don't want to give away too much now, just a little teaser, but this story is completely different in some ways from every other story that we have learned so far in Torah from the beginning of Breshit. This is so different than the life story of Abraham and the life story of Yitzchak, what's going on with these two brothers. So we'll talk more about that as we continue. And the truth is, and I really want you to take over, Jim, because you actually wrote an entire book called Blood Brothers.
Subtitled A History of Israel's Enemy. We have people we idolize, so to speak, and there are people that we want to be like. And if there was anybody that Esav wanted to be like, in fact, he wanted to overtake Nimrod. And the sages tell us that the two were watching each other. They were eyeing each other. Esav had his eye on Nimrod, and Nimrod was jealous that Esav was getting this reputation as this mighty hunter, which is what he had been known for.
Didn't Esav ultimately kill Nimrod?
Yeah.
And take his coat?
The boys are 15 years of age when the sale of the birthright, the Bechorim, happens. And he comes in after the hunt, Esav, and he is tired and he thinks he's going to die, basically. And I always wondered, well, why did he think that way? Why had he given up and thought that the birthright was a mere whim? It didn't mean anything tangible to him, because Esav...
It meant responsibility, and that's the last thing that he wanted.
Exactly. I've often been fascinated in the Torah by the way in which they're written. Often is a comment on the event itself, and that is the fact that it happens so quickly.
You took the words right out of my mouth, and
Please.
Again, I'm frustrated here because I want to do something in the video this week, and I want the approach to be unified. But what you just said is so important, because again, as I was saying earlier, there's something about this story that is completely different than every story that we've learned until now. And it's also has to do, and I'm just teasing it now, Jim, it has to do with the way it's told. It has to do with the way it's told. Now, I want to take this back just a little bit before we go too far. And again, I want everyone to understand that you have a book available called Blood Brothers, which is about, basically it's about Yaakov and Esav. And I think that you do a lot with that. Where can our listeners see that book, get it?
They can get it,
is it on Amazon?
On Amazon. They can also get it at lightcatcherbooks.com. It is really, I hope, an explanation of the impact of this particular parsha. The things that are set in motion are with us today. It is our whole world today.
It's worlds in collision. They each represent a world, and it's worlds in collision. They're opposing forces. But it started before that. It started in Rivka's womb. Yeah. And the thing is, again, the verses are spare, and they're sparse, and they are powerful. She was agitated, and so she went to inquire of Hashem. And there are some that explain that she received a prophecy from Shem, the son of Noah. And she was told that, well, there were two nations in your womb. And then they grew up. Jacob is a wholesome man, abiding in tents, right? And Esav is a hunter. He knows hunting. He's a man of the field. And again, Esav comes out red and hairy and totally developed like an adult. Mm-hmm. Then Yaakov comes out holding on to the heel of Esav, and then right away, like you say, we skip a number of years to their adolescence, and we come to if that was indeed their adolescence, because we know that the blessings of Yitzchak were already when they were 40.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 45 to be exact.
And that has to do also with a very powerful idea of how long Rebecca was ruminating over the prophecy that she received. But I just want to say that, the story again. There's a fast forward here, and from their birth, we don't hear very much other than that the lads grew up, and then suddenly we have the story of the sale of the birthright, and that comes after the descriptions of the sons, and as if the description of the sons was enough to tell us everything that we need to know. And here again, we have the backstory of our sages, that they understand from the details of the verses and from what we have received from Sinai, is that Esav was a murderer. Esav was a sexual predator, and he was a brutal killer. And when you say, that he wasn't interested in the birthright, and he said, look, I'm going to die. What use to me is the birthright? So the chilling background of that is that what was this stew all about that Yaakov was preparing? Yaakov was preparing lentil soup, which I happen to know, if I can just get personal here for a minute, is your favorite soup. Now, I'm not in any way associating you with Esav, God forbid. You have left the spirit of Esav altogether. Jim, you are a person who is clinging to the God of Israel, but you love my wife's soups.
Oh yeah,
she makes a lot of wonderful soups, right? And one of your favorites is lentil soup.
Yeah.
But why was he making lentil soup that day? So that there's a tradition that teaches us that when a person is in mourning, the first meal that is served to them when their mourning period begins is lentils, because lentils are round, and they kind of recall the idea that what goes up comes down, what goes around comes around. This too shall pass. Like that life is a cycle. Also, there's an idea that lentils don't have a mouth; they don't have an opening, and so too the mourner is kind of like unable to speak. And the idea is that Isaac, Jacob's father, was mourning because this was the day of Abraham's funeral.
Death. Yeah.
And so Jacob was preparing this meal for his father. So Esav comes in, and the verse tells us that he comes in and he's exhausted. He comes in. Why is he so tired? Again, every word here is so powerful, right? He comes and he came in from the field, and he was exhausted. And so the sages tell us that day he basically savaged the major cardinal principles of Torah. He committed murder, he committed a sexual offense, he committed idolatry, and he was actually tired from the weight of these sins. And he comes in and he says, "What are you making? What are you doing?" And Yaakov explained to him that their grandfather passed away, and this is a mourner's meal. And so the way that the sages portray the conversation is that Esav said, "What? Such a man like Abraham, such a tzaddik, such a righteous person, he also dies? You mean death is everywhere tracking us down, as Dylan says? This is just like, that's it? We're all going to die? Huh? That's it? So then I don't care for anything for then I don't believe in it. I don't believe in life." He basically denied the concept of life after death, the coming world. He scoffed it. He mocked it. But the bottom line of what all of this is telling us is that all of these ideas are spiritual, and this their struggle, the struggle of Yaakov and Esav, is a spiritual struggle over basically what world is the dominant world, and what should we be doing in this world. And so basically Esav is saying, I don't need the birthright. I don't believe in it because I don't want the responsibility of fixing the world. I don't believe that there is any spiritual program at all. I don't believe in the redemption of humanity, is what he was saying. I don't believe in spiritual development. I don't believe in the redemption of humanity. You have to understand what's really going on here. He wanted the blessings, all right. He wanted the blessings of materialism in this world, but he showed this disdain and contempt for Hashem when he, as the verse says, he despised the birthright. And is this the proper time that I could bring in the verse from Malachi? It's not PC, but the Torah says it. So Malachi chapter 1 and it begins the prophecy of the word of Hashem to Israel by the hand of Malachi. I loved you, says Hashem, but you say, how have you loved us? Was not Esav the brother of Yaakov the word of Hashem? Yet I loved Yaakov, but I hated Esav. Hashem says, I hated Esav. I made his mountains a desolation and gave his heritage to the desert serpents. And then, of course, the book of Vadiyah, which is only one page. Vadiyah was a convert from Edom, and it was given to him to foretell the future of the nation of Edom. But the idea is what's really going on here is that we know that the legacy of Abraham, which he inherited from Adam, which is why he's buried in the tomb of the patriarchs, which is why he shows up when he shows up after the flood. The legacy of Abraham is living life for divine purpose, right? And that is what we're supposed to be doing. This is the development of the nation now. The nation is getting off the ground. Esav didn't want any part of that. He wanted everything on his terms for his benefit, right? He has a certain agenda. We also learned that he feigns righteousness, right? There's this idea that his father preferred him because of the hunting that was in his mouth, which some people think means that, that he basically brought him delicious food. But what it really means is that he feigned righteousness by talking of justice, by talking of wanting to do the right thing, by asking complicated questions in Torah and trying to impress his father Yitzchak, who apparently did not. Let me say not that he didn't see through it, but he didn't want to see through it, right? And Esav is kind of like we're getting this picture that he is a politician. He's like a fraud. It's smoke and mirrors, right? He's basically like a spin master. But the reason I bring all of this up is because of something that you said that was so perfect. This struggle is also within everyone. Now, there's a clash of two forces here, and that clash, by the way, as we're going to continue to learn, and I can't emphasize this enough. It's spiraling through history, this clash, right? And at this point that we're learning about it now, the question is basically who is going to carry on the legacy of Abraham and Yitzchak, because Hashem promised Abraham that his children would bring blessing to the world. But every person has free choice, and that is part of this whole conundrum as well, because within each person there's a struggle for a certain supremacy, and you can say that within each person there's a Yaakov and there's an Esav also. It's always about a struggle of the forces that are within us that we're dealing with, that sometimes are pulling us up and sometimes are pulling us down. And that also has a great deal to do with our story. Again, there's so many levels of understanding here, and none of them are simple.
Esav's entire life was a charade. It was a masquerade. It was an act, and that is key to him losing the birthright. Because what happens 30 years after the sale of the Bechorah, of the birthright? We have this whole mini drama that unfolds in the tent of his father, when his father, again, there is a death in the family, and there is mourning, and this time we hear of Isaac saying, I think I'm going to die. And I'd like a last meal. And of course, Rabbi, who has just passed away 30 years later when we're about to see the blessing being given to Yaakov rather than Esav, and that is the brother of Isaac, his brother Ishmael. And I think what's interesting to point out is that even though, and this is sort of a footnote that maybe I should have brought up at the end of the story, is that after he talks about, I'm really feeling in my years, I'm really feeling like I could go anytime. He actually lives much longer after this event, after the giving of the blessing. And this whole, and what I'm getting at is the fact that Esav and his penchant for putting on an act comes back to actually be his undoing.
And this is going to be going on for quite some time. And again, we're beginning these Torah portions now of Yaakov, which is the beginning of the nation of Israel, really. And there's so much going on here right now. Again, back to the sale. Again, he like you said, he is masquerading. He's masquerading as an innocent. He's even masquerading as righteous. He was never interested in the birthright. Once he understood that it's not a question of privilege, it's a question of responsibility for the whole world, right? And then, so again, he comes in the day of Abraham's death. He had raped a betrothed woman. He had committed murder. He had denied the existence of God. And he looks at the stew. And he's literally weighing in his mind the stew or the birthright.
Yeah.
The stew or the birthright, which is more important to me? And so you have like the expression about a person who sees red, he's called red. And this is a great secret of Torah. I mean, it's a very mystical idea that Edom, the word Edom, which is the nation of Esav, means red. And in fact, the Torah even says that the reason that he's right here in verse 30, we are told that the reason that Esav is called red, this is just staggering, is all because he said to Yaakov, pour into me now some of that very red stuff, for I am exhausted. Therefore, his name is called red. All because he referred to the food as red. In other words, what is this? Is it a disrespect that he couldn't name the name of the soup? What is this? That the Torah bothers to tell us that he is known as Edom all because of that. And it is a great secret that Torah is showing us that Esav is all about desire, unbridled, unlimited desire for instant gratification. There's even a word that's used here in this verse, which is so unusual. It just has no parallel anywhere. And this is how I translated it correctly here in the art scroll, that he said to me, pour into me now. He didn't say feed me. He didn't say give me a portion. He didn't say may I have. He said pour into me is the word haliteni, which basically means I'll open up my mouth wide, my throat wide, and I don't have any time. I used to call this the ultimate feed me, burp me, get me out of here. Like I'll open up my throat, my gullet, just pour it in. Some of that very red stuff. I mean, he's always called forever. Now forever is called red because of this. So that redness is the redness of heat and bloodlust and the immediate fulfillment of the basest desires.
Yeah,
and it's not just like an anecdote. It's not a side story. That's why Torah bothers to include these words in the verse. Therefore, he is called red because this is his description. This is his national characteristic, as it were.
The lentils are raw. When they're done, they're brown. They're a deep brown color. But if they're red, they're still undercooked. They're raw. And so this is why, as a little teaser for those that want to read my book, this embodies the Western world today, because Esav is the ancestor, not only philosophically, but also historically and even geopolitically, the birth of the Western world, Western values, and this is consumerism. I want it now. And even the religion that is in the world today that Esav gave birth to is a religion of a bloody Messiah. And someone who basically says, all you got to do to win a place in heaven is to instantly say the secret words, the magic recipe, and you're in. I have a chapter, and I'm going to get in trouble with some of our listeners, but the chapter is called Esau's Messiah. And that's really who this personage is. And everything about him
I think you get in trouble, Joe. I don't think you're going to get in trouble.
Well, there's a certain demographic, if you will.
Wait, who's knocking at your door?
Yeah.
Listen, the thing is, on Tuesday, every other Tuesday, we are studying in our Zoom lessons the classic work Mesilat Yesharim, which is the path of the just. It's a very beautiful work by the holy Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. It's very famous, and it's about clinging to Hashem and basically ascending in a spiritual progression to become more and more finely attuned to our own spiritual potential. And it's basically about becoming as pure as we can to cling to Hashem, right? So we're learning this beautiful class every other Tuesday. And we just learned about the first level in this spiritual progression. The first level is called Zihirut, which means watchfulness. And the author explains how the first step in a person taking control of themselves and starting to come closer to Hashem is, he calls it watchfulness. And it has to do with the idea of basically learning self-control. I call it mindfulness. He's basically describing the necessity to stop and think before we do anything, before we do any act, before we speak, before we look at something, before we, let's say, post something to Facebook, even before we think a thought, to stop and say, is this necessary? But in other words, instead of being in the passenger seat, to try to be in the driver's seat and to appoint yourself as a watchman over yourself and to say, is this really necessary? Is this really what I want to do? Is this going to advance righteousness? Is this the thing to do? Am I going to hurt someone? Is it not right that I should do this? So it's about mindfulness. And the reason I bring this up now, and it's a very, very compelling and beautiful study. And of course, any of our listeners are invited to join us in our Zoom classes. We have a Zoom class every Sunday. And in fact, right now we're learning about David and Goliath in the book of 1 Samuel. And we have every other Tuesday, we're learning this beautiful work, the path of the just. The reason I bring it up is because I say mindfulness and self-control. This is the opposite of Esav. And what you were just saying, the Western idea of immediate gratification and a culture that is totally self-absorbed, that's what Esav is really all about. And it all is derived from this scene of basically opening up his mouth and saying, just feed me like this, just this kind of like this like raw primal brutality, pour the raw lentils down my throat. And it's the opposite of this concept of being measured, being self-disciplined, being in control, not allowing one's own heat to dominate. And I think that all of those pitfalls of human nature are just boiling, and like the stew is not simmering anymore. The stew is boiling over. And it's the stew of the contemporary reality that we're facing every day now, and it's just staggering to see, how people live today. And again, if you take just the example of social media and the addiction that people have to posting and to reacting and to being completely insensitive and unthinking about other people's feelings, and the total self-absorption with there's just no question in my mind that the entire world must be very interested in what I ate for breakfast and how it made me feel. They must be interested because the world is centered around me, and therefore all the billions of people that are on Facebook, of course, I have to share with them, and I have to take a picture of my breakfast. And by the way, it's my birthday and everything else, because it's all about this instead of being part of Hashem's program and being a small cog in something turning for the benefit of humanity and for Hashem's plan. It became just it stopped at some point, and it is stuck on this self-perpetuating, self-immolating self-worship, which is really what Esav is all about.
The Torah calls the brothers twins because all through history, Esav would be the darker mirror image of his brother. Jacob has what eventually became the nation of Israel and its priesthood and its temples and its first and second and hopefully third temple. Esav has his priesthood, his heavy air quotes here, his temples, his places of worship, and his ideas are actually, the kind of thief that Esau also was. He actually steals the ideas of his brother to present his ideas about God. The problem is they're all clothed in the idea of materialism. But before I get off on a tangent, which I generally do, again is the way this all comes around to this charade, this act. Rivka is actually standing in for Eve, but she's also rectifying the soul of Eve. The sin in the garden introduced, they went from the world of truth to the world of illusion. And the sages tell us that Yaakov represented truth. He represented the world of truth. And so what happens is
even though it looks like the opposite, because people to this day say, "Oh, Yaakov is a thief. He comes and he's fooling."
But he's not, because what was his mother told? What was his mother told, Rabbi, when he was in the womb? His mother was told that the elder shall serve the younger.
She's waiting for 40 years. And this is also has to do with a very important question that one might ask, which is, why did Rivka do what she did? Why did she facilitate Yaakov's charade with his father? And again, there's so much here why Yitzchak was insistent on trying to give the blessing first to Esav, because Yitzchak wanted to believe in Esav's potential, because he saw that Esav was so earthy and so connected to this earth. And of course, we know that Torah is concerned with this world, and this world is the world that we were put in, and we are meant to elevate it. And when he saw that Esav was so practical and such a hunter and such a man of this world, he was hoping that he would be able to sanctify Hashem in this world, because that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing. But unfortunately, Esav was only of this world, and he wanted nothing to do with bringing Hashem into this world, or the responsibility of what it means to be a person in this world. And you know, the thing is that there's so much here. Even again, the Torah is being very economical with these descriptions, and it's a lifetime of study. And in fact, we, again, just to mention the Zoom lessons, we had a multi-part series on the lives of the forefathers, and we went into this in detail. The fact that Esav is a hunter, why does he have to be a hunter? A hunter has to pursue, because the thing that he's pursuing is running away from him. And that's the thing about Esav, is that he exuded this evil. And that's the whole idea of a hunter basically takes by force. He takes what he wants with no feeling of compunction. I want that. I'm going to take it. I'm going to force it. That's exactly what he was. He was an institutionalized, institutional rapist of everything, of women, of nature, of the world. This is what he was. He was a hunter. Everything is running away from him, and he's running after everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then interestingly, when Yaakov in the next Torah portion of Vayetze, when he comes to the place where he lays down and he sees the ladder, we have that whole idea that under his head, he placed 12 stones around his head. But then when he woke up in the morning, there were only one stone, right? That famous inference from the wording of the verses in Parashat Vayetze. And so we have a famous idea, as Rashi cites from our sages, that the stones all said, I want to be under his head. I want the righteous tzaddik to put his head on me. And so that all the stones became one. And the idea of that simple story that sounds rather whimsical, that it's the truth that it's conveying us, is that when it comes to a righteous person, it's like all of nature, the world itself wants him, longs for him, longs to be a part of his dealing with Hashem, wants to facilitate him. Like longs to be used by him. So all the stones turned into one, because it's the opposite of Esav. And Esav is running after the animal that's running after him, and the stones are all melting together under Yaakov's head, because they want to be with him. That's the idea.
Isaac says, I'm weary. I think I'm going to die. I'd love one of your great barbecues, son, that you make for me. And he sends him off to get it. And then Rivka, the mom, grabs, Jacob and says, it's time. You need to go and get the blessing that God told me you were supposed to get, because he is supposed to serve. Esav is supposed to serve you, not the other way around.
You said something that is so staggering. This is the weekly kiss on the forehead. Come here. You said something brilliant and prophetic that Hashem gave you, an unbelievable truth. because you mentioned the Garden of Eden.
Yeah.
As that there's a kind of a feeling of a throwback here. And again, everybody who learns these Torah portions feels that we're working through some sort of awesome cosmic themes. This is so powerful. This is bigger than life. We're working through cosmic themes of rectification here. But what happened is that Yaakov said to Rivka, but my brother Esav is a hairy man and I'm a smooth man. And so first of all, she says to him, listen to me. She says, listen to me. Your curse be on me. Your curse be on me, my son. Only heed my voice and go fetch them for me. So the mystic sages teach, Jim, that exactly what you said, that this is basically Adam and Eve all over again.
Right.
That in the Garden of Eden, it was Adam and Eve. And now she is Eve. And Yaakov, her son, is Adam. And she's basically saying, because again, it's this unbelievable cosmic tikkun. So she's saying to him, I know that the first time you listened to me, I really messed you up.
Right.
I know that the first time you listened to me, I know that was really, we went south. But now I'm saying to you, no. And I know that I brought a curse to the world. No, now your curse be upon me. Listen to me, and now make the tikkun for your having listened to me then, and it was the bad advice. Now listen to me, because we're going to fix this and put the proper path in motion now for blessing to dwell in the world. Chapter 27 and verse 15. Rebekah then took her older son Esav's. Here the translation says clean garments. It can also be read as precious garments, the bigdei chamudot, which were with her in the house. Mm-hmm. Why was there a pig? Esav is a married man. He's got all these idolatrous wives. Why is there a pig and he's not even Jewish, so it's not like he has like this is like a whole Jewish mother thing, like I'm going to leave my clothes in my mother's house. Why is there a peg in Rivka's foyer with Esav's garments on it? Because Esav didn't trust his wives, and that was the garment of Adam Harishon.
Right. Yeah.
That was the garment, and that was the garment that I have a whole series of classes on this garment and how eventually it affects Yosef in Egypt. This garment is the garment that Nimrod wore, through which he achieved dominion over the natural world. This is the garment that Hashem made for Adam HaRishon, and it was with Noah on the ark, and it went to Nimrod, and Esav waylaid Nimrod and took the coat. And this is the very garment that Yaakov wore when he went into Yitzchak.
And the garments were, the sages tell us that the garments given to Adam and Eve that were literally fashioned by the Creator were to make them priests. They were supposed to be. And so by Jacob putting on these garments once again and getting the blessing of the priesthood was being conferred on Jacob and his descendants that day in the tent of his father. There's another linkage, and that is God told Eve that she would experience pain in childbirth. And this directly references the pain of childbirth that Rebekah was going through with these twins struggling in her and making things so painful. So Rebekah deceived her husband to open his eyes to see the error he was about to commit by conferring the blessing on the wrong son.
You have collated a lot of these beautiful teachings in your wonderful book, Blood Brothers, which I hope our listeners will look for. I highly recommend it. You did a marvelously scholarly job on that book. Speaking of your prowess, Jim, your tremendous scholarship, I understand that you're very soon going on a speaking tour in the United States.
Well, thank you for bringing it up. I will be in Chicago, and I'm working with a wonderful organization started in Israel 18 years ago, I think, by a friend of mine named David Wilner, who you know. They put together educational materials that link the archaeology and the Tanakh and the history of the people of Israel. So if anybody out there listening to us today would like to come to Holiday Inn in Skokie, Motzei Shabbat, it'll be 8:30 p.m. I'll be doing my lecture on the riddle of the Exodus. And also I'll be giving some new material. So if you want to hear some new findings on the evidence for the Exodus, come to that 8:30 Saturday night, November the 13th. And then Monday evening at 7 p.m., I'll be at the JCC in the JCC Northbrook there in Chicago. And I will be talking at 7 p.m. about the Copper Scroll. And the Copper Scroll, of course, is this amazing artifact found at Qumran back in 1952, which is unusual in the respect that of all of the scrolls found at Qumran, this is the only scroll made of copper, and it's the only one that is not a book. It is an inventory of the treasures of the temple. And we'll talk about the importance of that. So thank you for bringing that up. And people
could you share your email address now with everybody that might not have heard and that might want more details about your venues?
Exactly. You can drop me a line at Noahide, Noahide, all lowercase, Noahide 2008 at yahoo.com. So again, appreciate you bringing that up, and I hope people can come out.
Well, Jim, I'm sure everybody that gets the privilege of hearing you will be most appreciative. So to wrap it up, I think that we see that these worlds in collision that were set into motion represent Hashem's plan of basically working through this conflict towards the ultimate redemption of humanity, towards his plan, again, back to the Garden of Eden, basically setting to right the human condition. And as we see today, the scourge of self-absorption, of instant gratification, of the lack of reverence for life that is represented by Esav, we understand kind of what is going on a deeper level, that, we are basically trying to clarify the divine image in which we were created, and it's still reverberating and going through these cycles.